It is time to begin seeking excellence.
I remember not too long ago I was at this it wasn't a men's group that like meets on a regular basis, but it was like a kind of a one man or one day men's group meeting. And I remember talking with this guy that was there. And one thing I thought was really interesting that he said was he was like, men, we were talking about like masculinity and leadership and all the kind of typical man stuff, right? When you're talking to Catholic men. And he said something that I remember hearing a lot of times when I was in college. And this used to kind of drive me crazy. If I'm being totally honest with you, when I was in college, I'd heard a lot of people kind of, and not people, I mean, I heard a lot of men and men's talks and things like that share like, man, we go to war, we fight, we battle, right? Rah, 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 rah. And it was really interesting to me because I also had this experience with ROTC that I remember that was very powerful for me. And it was like, we had there was a lot of people who had been to war, obviously. I joined ROTC in 2011. And this is when Iraq especially is like really popping off. There's kind of this resurgence when ISIS was really kind of on the rise and all of that. And so it was kind of a crazy time for the war in the Middle East, the war on terror. And man, I just remember hearing these guys who had been to war, had been deployed multiple times, telling us as cadets, they were like, man, we're just really proud of you. You guys are really impressive and all this stuff. And I'm like, man, what are you talking about? Like, how do you keep saying that? Like, you say you respect us. You say you look, you're proud of us. And I'm like, we haven't done anything. And you're like an actual, you've been to war, homie. Like, what are you proud of me for? And I'll never forget one of the leaders. And this, I think there's some wisdom to this. I think that there's a lot of humility in it. He said, yeah, I've been to war, but like I didn't sign up during a time of war. I joined in the late 90s or whatever, and just so happened that we had 9/11 and we ended up going to war. But he's like, I didn't join the military in a time of war. He's like, you guys are signing up, like you're volunteering during wartime. Like that war is on the horizon for you because we're currently in war when you're signing up to be in the military. And I just thought that was a really powerful experience and a really interesting thing because, I'm sitting here with this guy and I think he works for like a Catholic ministry of some sort. And he's like mid-20s, I would guess. And he's talking about how like, men, when we see that there's a battle to fight, like we get ready, we go to war. And I just remember thinking like, and I don't say this super pridefully, right? I'm not trying to be like a douchebag veteran, but there's just something to the fact that like most of us did not do that. Most of us were kids when we saw 9/11 happen. And some of us resolved to say, I'm going to go to war. I'm going to go fight. And many of us said, somebody else is going to go to war. Somebody else is going to go fight. And that's okay, right? We're not all called to be soldiers. I get that. And I'm not trying to get into this like macho man masculinity that says, oh, if you're going to be a man, you got to be a police officer or a firefighter. You got to be, jacked, and you got to be tough, and you got to be whatever. I think you do have to be tough, but that toughness can look different ways for different people. But I just think we shouldn't play ourselves acting like just because we're men, we automatically sign up for battle, because I don't think that's always true. And I think you see that right now in a lot of ways where we talk about the culture wars, we talk about the battles that's going on in society. And man, it just saddens me. I got in this frustrating conversation with this guy the other day. I if you've been listening for a while, I coached basketball last year, and it was a huge blessing in my life. But man, was it exhausting and very time consuming. It was like middle school basketball, so 7th and 8th grade boys. And I absolutely loved it. I love Versati Sports. I think what Ryan O'Connor's doing here in Denver with Versati Sports is amazing. I got in a frustrating conversation with him, but I wasn't frustrated with him. But he was asking if I was interested in coaching again this year. And I was like, man, I'm really trying to focus on seeking excellence in what I'm doing here, because it's like I never get to actually just like focus on seeking excellence. Why? Because, and you're thinking to yourself, if you're being realistic, I think that, well, it seems like you're focused on seeking excellence because you're putting out 3 podcasts a week, which is pretty ridiculous for somebody who's not doing that full time. And I'd say the answer to that is yes, I agree with that. It's pretty wild. But at the same time, it's always still kind of been an afterthought. It's still something I have to do even today, right? I'm recording this episode and I have to like rush right off. I don't get to edit it afterwards or spend the time writing the caption right after like I'd like to, because I always have to do it in this kind of rush fashion. This is my second podcast I'm recording today. And it's a work day. I got to get home, pick up some steaks on the way home to grill and make dinner and things like that with Emily. And then we're rushing off to a marriage conference, a retreat tonight. And so that's a beautiful thing. It's a great thing, but there's so much, right? There's so many things you can say yes to that I'm trying to get into a better habit, especially for 2024, to just say no to some things, because I'm like, seeking excellence to me is a ministry. I do this not for selfish gain. I don't do it because um, I mean, I do get pleasure from it. I really enjoy podcasting and all that, but I make no money from it, right? We lose money on it. And so it's like, I have to be able to give time to this. I got to start looking at seeking excellence as volunteer work. So I got to start looking at that as part of my volunteering, right? Because I can't be doing seeking excellence several hours a week, volunteering at RCIA for 3 hours a week, volunteering at youth group in my parish. I got asked to lead to work with the school, our parish school, and doing some stuff with some of the young boys there, with some faith formation stuff during the school day. Get asked to coach basketball, right, a couple nights a week, and then games, usually twice a week. On top of that, so that's usually 4 days a week. Asked to lecture and to EMHC, asked to, it goes on and on and on. And then you get asked to give talks and things like that locally at a very heavy discount or for free. And it's like, you get to this point where it's like you start to see the kind of 80-20 rule in effect, where it's like 20% of the people in the church do 80% of the work. And that's easy to do when you're optimistic and you're naive, because there was a certain point in my life where that was the case, but I didn't realize it was the case, right? I didn't actually believe that. I remember reading that in like Dynamic Catholic, 4 Signs of a Dynamic Catholic, or Rediscover Catholicism, wherever they released that. And I was like, surely that's not really true. I think it was 4 Signs that talks about this research. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure that it's kind of lopsided, but it's not 80-20, like that's kind of crazy. But it is. And you see this, and it constantly happens where when things need to be done, right? I've told the story before about needing, they needed volunteers to help clean the church at Our Lady of Lourdes at our parish. And I'm like, sure, we have a full parish of young adults. I'm sure a ton of people are going to show up, and people don't. And you kind of see this consumer Catholicism that so many people have, where they just show up and receive, and they don't have any expectation on themselves to actually give back and to do anything. And so my frustration again with Ryan about coaching basketball this year was not that I said no. He was not frustrated with me for that. He understood. He appreciated my honesty. But I was so mad that he couldn't find another man to coach his basketball team, right? Whether it be the fathers of the kids or just a young man in Denver. I'm like, we have a ton of young Catholic adults. I know a ton of guys. I get asked to play in men's leagues all the time with all these Catholic men. And I know I have several friends, I think of my friend Aaron, who's a coach for a high school team, and he does a ton of stuff. He volunteers at youth group. He's the same way, right? When you start doing some things, you do a ton of stuff. And so we have this group, this thing of young adult Catholics. I'm thinking about this men's group. I'm like, I was just with 20 guys the other day, and I was the only married one in the room. And so I'm married. Not only am I doing all this other shit, but I'm also married and have a kid. And so it's like, where's everybody else? Where is everyone? And we talk about culture wars and battles and stuff like that. Well, these young men need a leader. They need a role model. I had an incredible experience, and I saw the authority I had with these young guys because I was their coach, and the impact you can have in somebody's life and coaching. And I'm just like, man, my message today is just don't bullshit yourself. Don't play yourself. If you're going to say that there's a war going on, if you're going to say, oh, we Catholics and we men, we sign up for battle when things are needed and we fight and all that, it's like, no, you don't. A lot of us don't. It's just a reality. And I've been there. At certain points in my life, I was that person, right? At a certain point in my life, I thought I was a force for good when I was a force for evil. But I think that was the worst place I was in, when I was just kind of deceiving myself. At least at some point I had to be realistic and say, okay, I'm a force for evil. And then I said, okay, now I'm kind of neutral. And now I'm in a season of trying to fight to be a force for good. But what we need to actually enlist more soldiers into the battle. We need to enlist more people to wake up and say, okay, I need to take responsibility. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, you might be traveling for work, or you might have other fun stuff you want to go do. It might hit into some of your skiing. It might hit into some of your fun, going to the Catholic young adult parties and things like that, or whatever it is, whatever your fun thing is, your adult leagues. There's sacrifices that have to be made in order to do this stuff. but that's what life requires. That's what life takes. It requires and demands sacrifices. This is why all these people, right? When you're a kid and you're seeing these guys go off to war and you're a young boy, you're like, I want to do that someday. And then you're like, man, ROTC, they got to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Oh man, if I do go into the military, I got to sacrifice. I don't get to choose where I live. You know, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of sacrifices that come with that. To be actually about the life, you actually have to be about the life. I love the and I like to tell this, at men's conferences and things too. The classic Ronnie Coleman quote. If you don't know who Ronnie Coleman is, you should look him up. He's an OG bodybuilder, Mr. Olympia many times over, one of the greatest bodybuilders of all time. Some say the best. And he's got a really high pitched voice, and he's funny as hell. And he's got this quote where he says, "Everybody want to be a bodybuilder, but don't nobody want to lift no heavy ass weight though." And that's what it is, man. We have so many people we don't want to lift. We don't want to lift heavy weights. Everybody wants to be a saint. Everybody wants to be an impact player. Everybody wants to make a difference in people's lives. But then when it comes down to actually doing the work, when it comes down to doing the things that aren't so cute, we don't want to do that. And I can't take it, man. I see all these things when there's retreats or when there's talks or the fun stuff. That's when everybody shows up. But when it comes down to, oh, we need somebody to actually help do some things, where is everyone? I've seen it in just people that we've, come across and gotten to know over the years. It's like, what are you actually doing to help? We can't just show up to consume, guys. You have to get involved. We have to be doing things. We have to be sacrificing and doing stuff that is going to help advance this mission, advance the good. And so I just want to encourage you today, if you are not being generous, you were called to be generous. And you're not just called to be financially generous, you are called to that. But you're also called to be generous with your time and be generous with your talent. And if you think you have nothing to give, if you're doing this kind of false humility thing where you have nothing to offer, I need you to stop that. Because one, some of us are tired from getting asked to do everything when things come up. And it's a blessing, and I feel blessed that people entrust me with these different things, that people want me to, whether it's speaking or coaching or whatever it is, that they think that I'd do well at that. I'm so grateful for that, and I really do appreciate it. And I'm glad that people think highly of me. Some people, at least, that they would entrust me with their kids, with their mission, whatever it is, with their community. But at the same time, I'm tired, and I'm not just speaking for me. I'm speaking for I'm just getting to this point, right? I'm just now starting at that. I've seen people when I was in parish consulting and working in parish life and other ministry parts of ministry that have been doing it for years like this, and they're just not willing to speak up to challenge the rest of the church. And that's what I'm trying to do, is just tell you, if you're this, and I think this ties into the dating and stuff. And I try to share this when I talk about dating, is that so many times we want a spouse, right? We want, God, I want to serve. If you're not willing to serve the church when you're single, why would you be willing to serve the domestic church when you're married? If you're not willing to make sacrifices to your life, to your wants and your needs and your desires when you're single, why do you feel like God should entrust you with a family, to give you a kid and a spouse that you have to love and you have to sacrifice for every single day? I feel like I was already making the sacrifices in a lot of ways for my future family, for my future spouse, for my future kids. When I was single, I was already volunteering and doing a lot of stuff, the mission trips and all kinds of stuff, volunteering all the way back to college. And I still feel like it's really hard now to say no to the things that I want to do, the things that I want for the sake of my family. I find it really difficult to not be selfish. And I feel like I really tried to not be selfish when I was single. And I'm not saying that that you are so. I don't know your story. You can tell and decide if you're convicted by this or not. This isn't a message for everyone. This might be a message for 3 people that are going to listen to this. But I need you to understand, especially if you're a man out there, stop bullshitting yourself saying that men show up for battle and we sign up and we volunteer and all this stuff. It's nonsense, man. I remember I called a couple people afterwards asking about coaching, and just like the BS answers you get from guys who aren't doing anything, unmarried men who aren't doing anything. And then you see them struggling and be like, I don't know my purpose and I'm struggling and I don't feel motivated. I don't feel inspired. I don't feel close to God. It's like, because you say no every time God asks you to do something. And I'm not saying I don't make presumptions to say that every time I think of somebody for a task, that's God asking them. I don't make that assumption. I'm not that presumptuous. I'm arrogant, I'm cocky, but I'm not that cocky, right? That'd be ridiculous. But at the same time, You're telling me he never asked you to do anything? If I started doing audits of people and we started asking, okay, we started doing audits of some of these single people or married people, or even myself, I'm convicted by this. What's your prayer life really like? What's your volunteer time and your generosity really like? In those 4 signs of a dynamic Catholic, in prayer, study, generosity, and evangelization, how would you actually rate yourself? If I audited your time and your calendar, your schedule, where your money goes, would I see that those 4 things are a priority in your life? Are you actually investing in your study and formation as a Catholic? Do you look at retreats and things like that and say, oh, that's too expensive. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to spend money on that. I'm not going to spend money on this Catholic book or this course or whatever it is because it's too much money. But then you spend $50 going out on the weekend. Spend $40 at brunch. You think about time. Oh, I don't have time to go do a holy hour. I don't ever go to adoration because I never have time. I'm always so busy. I can't make it to daily mass. And it's like, well, what else am I spending time on? If I'm not making it to those things, which I expressed in the previous podcast, I've been really struggling to get up in time and prioritize making time for daily mass. But what the hell else am I spending time doing? There's got to be something in my life. If I'm not spending time with the Lord, if I'm not making a holy hour at least once a week, praying every day and going to daily mass at least once or twice a week, there's something in my life that I'm doing that I shouldn't be doing. And that's where I started to get to this point where I'm like, I got to start saying no to stuff because I was filling up all of my evenings, and the evening time is when we go to adoration together. When we were on a good rhythm of going to do a holy hour and going to adoration once a week together, which we want to be a central part of our marriage and family life, it was during the evenings. And so if I fill up every evening with volunteer stuff, that's too much. But why do we get to this point, some of us, when we are stretched so thin? It's because other people aren't doing shit. And so this is where I'm like, I start to draw the line, and then I say no to coaching, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And I feel bad, right? I just start to feel this, it's not a guilt, but it's just like, man, I don't want them to not have a team because I said no to it. But it drives me insane that we don't all share that. Like, truly, I feel like I'm coming out, like I said at the beginning, kind of coming out of this season of being naive and thinking that, well, everybody's giving it their all and everybody's spread thin. So maybe God is really calling me to do this, even though I thought that he wanted me to start to say no to some things so that I could get my prayer life and daily mass and these things back in the right place. But I want to just encourage you to be discerning with this stuff, because some of you I know out there are going to relate to this on my end. Some of you are going to hate this, and some of you are going to be convicted by it and start to do more. If you're relating to this, then I want to just encourage you to say no to some things. And sometimes to get to great, you have to say no to the good. And so you might get opportunities to volunteer, to do things, to be a part of youth, whatever it is. And it might be a season for you to say no. God might be calling you to focus on different things in your life, to prioritize other areas of your life, and start to evaluate and assess: am I really taking care of me, and not taking care of me in like a selfish self-care, self-love bullshit kind of way, but saying like, am I taking care of leading myself well first before I start to try to lead other people? And sometimes you are, right? Sometimes you might have a really good established prayer life. You're growing in holiness and faith and strength in the Lord. And then you start to do other things, and then it starts to detract away from the former growth, that personal inward growth. And then you start to see, oh, I'm feeling really dry. I'm feeling really discouraged, dejected. That's when you have to start to take time to evaluate, to say, okay, am I still staying rooted? Am I staying faithful? I'm a branch. Am I staying connected to the vine? And if I'm not, then maybe some of the things that I'm doing, some of these good works, have to start to decrease so that I can stay connected to the vine. Because if I'm not able to do both, then the latter has to go, right? These other good things have to go, because I have to stay connected to the sacraments, to prayer, to growing spiritually and staying connected to the Lord, being covered in the dust of our rabbi. Because if we're not doing that, what are we giving to other people? Ourselves. And we don't want to give ourselves to other people. We want to give Jesus away to other people. We want to give the light and love and grace of our Lord Jesus Christ away to other people. And so we have to keep that in mind. You have to be thinking about that. So there's two sides of this, man. But don't think just because you're busy in your professional life, in your personal life, and dating and family and friends and all this nonsense and these obligations that your family might put on you or whatever, that does not count as being generous with your time. Doing things out of guilt does not count as being generous. Things that don't matter, right? You're called to be generous with your time. And so that means that you have to be willing to open up and say, okay, even just for a season, things like coaching, right, that only lasts for a short period of time, being open and willing to volunteer to do those things, guys, you have to be willing to do that. And so I hope you understand. I'm not trying to say this from like this cocky, oh, look at me, look at all the things I do. I don't give a shit. I mean, you guys should know this, right? Like, I don't care what people think about me. I share these things because I think that they're true, and I think that they're the message that God puts on my heart to share. I pray about this stuff before I go live, before I hit record. And so this is what I thought that the Lord wanted me to share today, and that I was moved to talk about, and that I was feeling passionate about. And so I hope that you understand that. And this isn't something that, yeah, I'm trying to say, oh, look how good I am because I volunteer. No, I don't care. I don't care what you think about me. What I care about is that we're getting the job done. What I care about is that you're my fellow soldier in the battle. You're my fellow laborer in the vineyard. And if you're just half-assing and sitting on your ass, I need you to get up and actually pick up your basket and get back out into the vineyard and get to work. Pick up your shovel, because we all need that. And sometimes I need you to tell me that. Sometimes I need you to call me out and hold me accountable. But, I just finished recording the episode on David and the prophet Nathan. And it's amazing. One thing I forgot to hit on in that story is the fact that sometimes God calls us to call somebody else out. And sometimes we get called out by somebody else, and we have to recognize and discern, is this coming from the Lord or is this coming from the devil? But we have to be willing to actually call people out and hold people accountable, because this is what the prophets and the holy people before us have done. And so what's beautiful about a podcast, I get to do that, and I don't know who I'm talking to. So you might think that this was helpful. You might think it was useless. You might think I'm crazy, but at least you know that I'm not calling you out individually. I'm not sending this to anybody specifically, but I just know, generally speaking, to my Catholic young adults, that we need to be on top of this stuff. We need to get involved. We need to be engaged. We need to stop playing ourselves and doing this rah-rah, masculine bullshit that says, oh, we all sign up for battle. Well, wars are going down all around us right now, and you can tell what man you would be if you think back, as most men do, and think, if I was alive during the Civil War, if I was alive during the Civil Rights Movement, if I was alive during the World War II and World War I, would I have gone? Would I have signed up to go fight? Or would I have been a draft dodger? Would I have been trying to get out of it? Would I have been trying to save my own life and save my own ass? You can tell. Because if you're not willing to get involved in coaching, or, make sacrifices to just give some of your time up once a week or twice a month or whatever it might be, you can probably assume you wouldn't have been willing to give your life. And so I think that's a good litmus test for some of us to say, would I be a martyr? Would I do some of these things? If I'm not willing to die to self a little bit, then you're not willing to die for this thing. And we need saints right now. We need people who are willing to die for this, who are willing to die for the truth, willing to die for the true, the good, and the beautiful. So I encourage you today to do that. Pray about it. Ask God how he's calling you to be used. If you're not actively doing something that is impacting the lives of other people, if you're not actively being generous with your time, I don't give a shit what season of your life you're going through. If you're not actively doing that, then you're wrong. You're just off. God is always calling us to do that. It might call us to take a step, scale back at some point, but you're never supposed to be just going to work, going to mass, going to young adult events, going to Bible study, and never giving. You have to give. Giving is not optional in the Christian life. Giving is not optional in the Christian life. Generosity is mandatory. It's what makes us, it's how we know we're a part of the team, how we know we're actually in the fight. And so God bless you. Thank you so much for listening today. If this was helpful, I encourage you to listen, to send it to somebody else that you think might value it. I know it's hard sending these challenging ones to other people, but share and just say, hey, let me know what you think about this. Maybe we can volunteer and get involved in something together. Find an accountability partner. Pray about this stuff, man, because it's important. And we have more people around than we have work getting done. And that is unacceptable. And so I encourage you to challenge other people when you get an opportunity. If you're sharing, speaking, whatever, share your experience with giving back to other people, and share the need that we have as a church to step up and be actively engaged in our faith, actively engaged in our community, in our parish, in our our local community, etc. Thanks so much. God bless you. Be your best.